Hello and welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Andy, on location at Mountain Top VFW Post here in Pleasant Hill, Ohio, for an episode I have been waiting to bring to you guys. We're going to talk today about the Springfield Rifle Musket series. Before we get going though, I do want to say thank you to the Civil War Digital Digest coffee grinders and our sponsor over at History Fix. Their financial contributions allow us to go on the road, allow us to bring this content to you. If you're not already a patron, we'd love your patronage if you consider joining. And if you're not already on History Fix, it's a great site. Go check it out. There's tons of history content for all sorts of eras. I guarantee you're going to find something there you like. We're here today to talk about one of the most iconic weapons of the Civil War, the Springfield Rifle Musket. The four models of musket served throughout the Civil War. They're sleek, they're rugged, they're deadly, and they're dependable. It's one of the most beautiful general service weapons the U.S. Army's ever produced. And here today, I am joined by Phil Spaugy, past commander of the North-South Skirmish Association and senior editor at Military Images Magazine, to talk about this weapon. Phil, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding.
Good.
I appreciate you having us out on your range today to talk to us about this.
We've had a fun day.
This has been great.
It's been a great day.
Well, this weapon here, this is the main battle weapon of the Civil War. I want to talk about where this weapon comes from, the history that sets it up. So, I think 50 years before, you go to the War of 1812, Napoleonic War, you got soldiers with flintlock, muskets, you've got specialist troops with, the Baker rifle or the 1803 rifle. And now in the Civil War, we have this. How do we get here from there?
Well, from the mid-1600s on to 1840, the flintlock technology was the technology for line infantry. Smoothbore, 69 caliber, range maybe a maximum of 100 yards, used against massed troops of the tactics of the day. We get to 1840 and technology starts to change, both in Britain and in the United States. And by the late 1840s, early 1850s, the British have developed their infield series of rifle muskets. They're seeing a lot of use in India and Crimea. A lot of good publicity in America because of the rifling. And now for the first time, we do a study, the U.S. Ordnance Department in the mid-1850s, on how to develop an effective rifle musket arm, which will put the accuracy of rifling in every line troop instead of just having the specialty troops have rifles. So now we're at a tipping point in arms technology.
Even the Mexican War, it's only 13 years, it ends 13 years before this war. The troops are using vastly different technology even then, aren't they?
Yes, they are. A lot of people will say, well, the Model 1842 was in production at time of the Mexican War, but the fact of it is, even though it had the percussion system, the flintlock Model 1816-22 was the arm of choice because they had a lot of problems supplying percussion caps to Mexico.
Well, and there is some advantage to the flintlock system where it's a self-contained cartridge. You don't need anything extra. You only need a cartridge box. You don't need a cap pouch. You prime the weapon with the powder from the cartridge itself. It's more self-contained than this system, isn't it?
Exactly. But again, you also have the misfires due to moisture in the pan and rain. Weather really would affect the flintlock, and the percussion system did away with all those sorts of factors.
So what are some of the other technological advances going into this? We have the percussion system, which is an obvious one. We've talked about rifling. How is this rifling done?
The rifling was basically done on rifling machines at the beginning at Springfield and Harpers Ferry Armory, water-driven rifling machines, 3 lands and grooves. They experimented with a lot of different rifling systems and came up with the 1-in-72 twist and 3 lands and grooves, shallow lands and grooves, progressive rifling.
So it's tapered, correct?
So it's tapered, as the most accurate sort of rifling to arm the U.S. troops of the day.
And this is meant to work as a system with a particular kind of projectile as well.
Exactly. The projectile, which would be initially known as the mini ball, actually it would be redeveloped by James Burton at Harpers Ferry Armory in the mid-1850s into the Harpers Ferry or Burton ball. What he did is he experimented with the thickness of the skirt and the fit of the ball to the barrel and the powder charge to come up with a ball that the expansion of the powder charge would expand the ball into the grooves, the rifling grooves, make them spin like a football for accuracy, versus the mini ball had an iron cup that had to be forced into the base of the projectile to expand.
So it also simplified the projectile,
It sure
but
did,
also made
yes.
it more reliable at the
Yeah,
same
it
time.
sure did.
Now, we've talked previously on this show about the predecessor, the 1842, and all of its antecedents, the Charleville, the 1795, the 1816, the 1808, all of that system. This is a remarkably different weapon, a clear break from that had come before.
It sure is, even though it remains the basic components, which is the lock, stock, and barrel, and the lock mechanism is simple. The fact that it is rifled and fitted with a rear sight to ensure accuracy at distance really makes it a lot different than the earlier arms.
You know, the comparison is often made to the British pattern 1853 rifle musket. And when Springfield Armory went to design this weapon, when the U.S. Army went to design, they actually had a pair of Tower Enfield muskets given to them by the British as part of the design process. To me, I always find it interesting. It's not an accident that this shares a lot of commonality with the Enfield. It's partly descended from it.
Exactly, and James Burton would actually travel to England in the mid-1850s and help them set up some of their machinery to produce the P-53.
The Model 1855 rifle musket was authorized on July 5, 1855, with production starting at Springfield Armory in 1857. It incorporates design elements from the Model 1842 musket, the Pattern 1853 Enfield rifle musket, and the Model 1841 Mississippi rifle. It was 55 and 15/16 inches long with a walnut stock and a 40-inch barrel finished in National Armory Bright. It had a brass fore-end cap. It was fitted with a Maynard tape primer system. The hammer was humped to facilitate the primer's use and incorporated a cutting edge to cut the priming paper when fired. The nipple bolster had a clean-out screw, and the barrel was fitted with a leaf-type long-range sight. A variety of changes were incorporated into the weapon during production, beginning in 1858. The rear leaf sight was simplified to 2 leaves. In 1859, a rear implement compartment was introduced, and the fore-end cap was changed to iron.
But remember, when they were producing these arms, they were producing them for an army of 16,000 men, not for 600,000 men. So by the time the Civil War would start, they had that base model of the 55 rifle musket, and they decided to make some changes, production changes. They did away with the Maynard primer, for example. That was the biggest change right there. It made it cheaper to build, plus there was less moving parts, and then it also ramped up production for them too.
The poor performance of the Maynard priming system and the need for a more economical rifle musket led to the adoption of the Model 1861 in February of that year. Harper's Ferry Armory was destroyed and captured on April 18, 1861, and never produced the Model 1861. Springfield Armory began production in July 1861. The implement compartment was deleted, as was the Maynard priming system. The lock was redesigned and the rear sight slightly modified from the one adopted in 1858.
You know, this weapon, we talked already about the fact it's developed from the Pattern 1853 Enfield. You know, I think it's really important to talk about Crimea. You know, the British used the Pattern 1851 Minet rifle at the beginning of the war, and then as the war went on, the rifle regiments, the Guards, started to get the Enfield. At battle after battle, you see where the Russians, who are using 1830s technology, are just getting slaughtered by these British and French troops using rifle muskets at range.
It had such a public relations effect on the American volunteer in 1861 because of all these newspaper accounts of the terrific accuracy of the rifle musket, the British rifle musket, whatever model it may be. So when the call for troops came and they started, everybody wanted what they would, basically the Enfield, more than anything else. The Model 1855 series was pretty much unknown. There weren't many made. It had not seen any combat. But the Enfield, the cry for Enfields, you can look at newspapers articles in 61 and it's Enfield, rifle musket, rifle, that's what we want, that's what we want. So its effect on the American volunteer and his psyche was immense. The one thing you got to understand though about the British use is they were well-trained troops in how to use that firearm at range.
I want to tap into your experience. Like you said, you've got almost 50 years shooting this. What are the things you've learned shooting this weapon? What are the things that you've learned to make it do what you need it to do?
Well, first thing I've learned is they're amazingly accurate to shoot if no one's shooting back at you. That's the first thing I learned. Second is the technology is amazingly accurate. What they came up with is an accurate firearm. However, during combat conditions, you will see the human factor come into effect of, fouling, unclean guns, unbeing able to load, fearful, being afraid in the ranks, not hitting your mark. But the arm itself will hold an amazing group at 100 yards with the service load of 60 grains of 2F powder and the Burton ball.
During the rush to gear up production in the summer of 1861, Samuel Colt was given 3 prototype Model 1861 rifle muskets prior to the finalization of the design. Colt immediately made up tooling based on these model muskets, only to discover the Army further changed the model after he had been given his models. The Army approved him to continue production of his weapons as the Special Model 1861. The weapon is 56 inches long with a 40-inch barrel. The nipple vent is straight, eliminating the vent screw. The bolster is flush with the lock plate. The lock plate is thinner and its internal components were closer to the pattern 1853 Enfield. The barrel bands had convex outer surfaces as adopted, and the hammer was redesigned to a swan neck pattern.
All right. Well, let's pause there with this discussion and let's go take this out to the range. You know, here at the Digest, we've never gone on the range before to live fire a weapon, and we're going to break that today. So we're going to take this beautiful day, we're going to go to the range, and we're going to go put this into operation. We're going to see how to load, how to fire it, and we're going to see the effects of this weapon, because I want you to appreciate not just how this looks on a rack, but how it looks on a gun range doing what it's supposed to do. So let's go cut away to that. So we moved over to the rifle range here, and we're going to get an opportunity now to actually fire these 1861s. Phil's got his original 1863 Savage contract. I've got a reproduction one here. It's Italian Euro arms. So of course, the reproduction not quite as good, obviously, as the original musket, but we want you to see how these weapons look when they're being used.
Okay, what I did, Andy, is I just poured the powder down the barrel. We'll see that again. And during the Civil War, the soldier would have to unwrap the ball out of the paper. A lot of people think that you put the paper down the barrel with the Burton ball. However, there's not enough windage in the barrel to do that, and you will jam up.
So it's going to interfere with it engaging the rifle
properly.
It's going
to jam the rifle up. So you can imagine trying to take the ball out of a paper during a battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now bring it up. I will cap the piece. This is an original 1863 Savage as issued in New Jersey.
Now, folks, as Phil's getting ready to fire, this is a closed range. We're lucky enough to be on, so of course it's all safe as we got cameras in various locations. Go ahead and show us, Phil.
That didn't work out so well. I couldn't hit the barn. We'll start it again. Again, we bite the tail off the cartridge. Pour the powder down the barrel. And keep in mind the condition of a Civil War soldier's cartridges too. They had been in a cartridge box, they had been bounced around, they might have gotten a little damp. So that may play a factor in his ability to fire the arm. And again, unwrap. Having good teeth is an important thing. The balls were actually made to, by theory, you should be able to squeeze them out of the cartridge. However, given the condition of the ammunition in battle, you don't know what's going to happen. You can imagine trying to do all this with somebody shooting at you. There we go. We just got the barn.
All right, I'm going to join you and try one too.
Fire away, Andy. You will read many accounts of the battle lines after the battle strewn with cartridge papers. Taking care to load to keep the muzzle away from your face.
There you go. You know, one of the things that I'm really surprised with shooting these is actually how easily they ram down. Now, granted, we both have clean barrels as we're going through this.
Well, you know, the bullets are lubed, obviously. But the other factor you have, too, in a battle, actual Civil War battle, is the quality of powder, how well the arm was clean, the actual fit of the ball to the bore, because the balls were sometimes varied by a few thousands. Actually, there's an account from a Ohio's officer who said that he requested 5.77 ammo for the top tier of their cartridge boxes and 5.70 for the bottom tier because of fouling.
Interesting. Now, of course, I'm going to blame this on shooting a reproduction versus you shooting an original for, of course, you having better accuracy on there.
Well, Andrew, it's a known fact that Michigan men have problems in Ohio sometimes.
You know, I was actually going to attribute it a little bit more to me being a naval aviator, and the weapon systems I'm used to employing are a little bit bigger.
Yeah, we'd be done now, wouldn't we? I'll fling one more.
So folks, you've seen Phil and I here on the 100-yard range firing away, and hopefully now you get a better idea of how this weapon was used, how it was loaded, fired, and get an idea of how difficult it was to see, or for soldiers to use. So now let's go back over, let's continue talking about the evolution of the Springfield rifle musket, its variants, and how they're used during the Civil War. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, getting to see how a Springfield rifle musket performs on the range. You know, it's one thing to see it here on a rack, but to go on the range, to see it being loaded, to see it fire, to see its effects is something else completely.
The rush to make an economized wartime variant in 1861 meant that several suggested modifications of the design were not adopted at that time. Many of them had been in the prototypes given to Samuel Colt that year and were seen in the special model 1861 rifle muskets. In February 1863, these designs were incorporated into the design of an updated rifle musket. The model 1863 features a straight nipple and the deletion of the vent screw. The bolster is flush with the lock plate. It has convex surface barrel bands retained by lateral screws rather than the band springs of the model 1861. It used a new tulip head ramrod and had a swan neck hammer. The stock's wrist was enlarged. The lock and hammer were color case hardened and the barrel bands were blued.
You know, this musket system, one thing that's really interesting about it is the four models, the 1855, the 1861, the 1863, and the 1864, which can also be called the 1863 Type 2, in the eyes of the government were essentially the same musket. On the ordnance reports, they filled the same column, so we don't actually know which of those a musket would be particularly. You kind of have to figure out the time and the place of the regiment. So if we have a regiment the fall of 1861 that's reporting that they have Springfield muskets or contract, they almost certainly have model 1855s. Whereas you go later in the war, you're going to start to see a mix of all of the different ones because the Army truly didn't care what they were. In their eyes, it was a 58 caliber model Springfield rifle musket.
A further series of changes to the rifle musket were approved by the Ordnance Department in December 1863, and production of the new model began in the second quarter of 1864. Barrel band springs were reintroduced, and the ramrod was changed for the groove style of the pattern 1853 Enfield. The barrel bands, sling swivels, trigger plate, and trigger guard were no longer case hardened. A new single leaf rear sight was introduced.
All right, Phil, we've got to talk about the four models of this. We've got to go and shoot it on the range. Before we go any further, what's the impact of this weapon in the Civil War in your mind?
Well, I think the biggest impact, Andy, is it was the soldier's best friend. It was the arm that the Federal infantrymen wanted to be armed with. They were ecstatic when they finally got it armed with. They had a lot of confidence in its ability at range, especially, even though for the most part it was used within 100 yards.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that about the 100-yard thing, right? Because we've talked before about muskets and their effective yard is 80 or something like that. And we can understand why 100 yards is effective, right? You talked about range estimation earlier. What were the commanders saying at the time about the effect of the rifling on the battlefield?
In 1863, George Willard, Brigadier General from New York, who would later die at Gettysburg in July of 63, wrote a paper. And the paper was basically the comparative value of smoothbore versus rifled arms. And in the paper, his theory was, or his premise actually was, that we were not training our troops well enough in the correct use of a rifled arm to issue them to the troops, that a regiment or a brigade should have one regiment of troops armed with rifled arms and trained in the use of such, and the rest would be armed with smoothbores, because the average distance of Civil War combat was well within smoothbore range of 100 yards.
But this weapon, you know, it's only really in service for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the war, the Army shuts down production of it. And what did they go to right after?
They actually used a lot of the parts to go to what they call the Allen conversion, which is the beginning of the trapdoor series. You know, it had the first Allen, second Allen, and the third Allen. The first Allen was a 58 caliber trapdoor, same length as this, except it had a trapdoor and took a big 58 caliber cartridge. The other two were 57 D cartridges.
You know, we've talked before on the channel about the 1816 being converted to percussion. We've talked about you with the Greenwood before, not only being given percussion, but rifled. And it's interesting that the Allen conversion is continuing that tradition of updating, using the old musket to update technology.
Yeah, kind of a stepping stone. It actually went through the 1873 trapdoor series, and then obviously with the 3040 Craig series was a complete different design.
So we have this musket, and you know, it's interesting, kind of an epilogue for it is its last use isn't in the United States. It's actually in France during the Franco-Prussian War, when the French are desperate for arms, because their primary weapon, just like the Prussians, was a bolt-action breech-loading rifle. That you have this gun having its swan song in France.
It really is, especially given the beginning of the Civil War, when we were bringing anything in from Europe to use. Now at the end, we're sending everything back to Europe for them to use.
Thank you, Phil, for being here with us today.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for coming down to shoot it here. This VFW post, Mountain Top's a beautiful location, and I hope we have an opportunity to use it again for this sort of thing.
I hope we get to come back down here too. This has been fantastic. It's been fantastic to talk about this weapon system, the Springfield rifle musket, one of the most iconic weapons of the Civil War. I hope we have helped you get a better understanding of this weapon. Some of its pros, some of its shortcomings, some of the shortcomings of how it was used during the war. Also, we've got to take it to the range, see how it got used on the battlefield, how it shoots. You can see how difficult of a process it is to load and fire, and why soldiers had to be so well drilled in its use to be able to load and fire in stressful conditions quickly and efficiently. Here on The Digest, we are all about making connections for you, whether you make connections with personal stories or, in this case, with a weapon. If you go out and you use these weapons, you're going to understand what these soldiers went through as they learned the weapon, as they fired the weapon, as they fought with the weapon. I hope you get a chance. If you can get an original or a reproduction that's safe to go to the range and shoot, it's a great time. But even if you just get to go and pick one up and feel the weight and feel how it is to carry it, to move it around, I think you're going to have a better appreciation of what the average Civil War soldier went through. For Civil War Digital Digest, I'm Andy. We'll catch you next time.